Hi, my name is Aya, you're watching Aya Reads, and I'm here to talk about my Roman Empire. So the books that I cannot stop thinking about. So for those of you who might have missed the trend, apparently, I think on TikTok, people found out that men spend a lot of their time thinking about the Roman Empire, and that kind of prompted a trend of people talking about what they cannot stop thinking about, and especially the booktube community or the book talk slash bookstagram community also made that a trend of books you could not stop thinking about. So I figured let's make a video about it and talk about the books that I cannot stop thinking about. So these are books that frequently just pop up in my mind. The only rule I had for this video was that I couldn't include books that I read this year, because obviously it makes sense that the books I read this year I was going to think about more than books that I read in other years. So these books I've been thinking about for years, and that is really special to me, that some of them I've read years and years and years ago and I still think about them and I still remember vivid scenes. And that to me is an amazing book, because I tend to forget things very fast. Sometimes I forget a book I read in the same month I read it in, whereas with these, some of them I've read 10 years ago and I still remember. I'm not saying I remember every single plot point of the book, but there are specific scenes that live in my mind rent free. Let's get started. These really are no particular order. Most of them are my favorite books. The first book is Wolfsong, obviously, by TJ Klune. I'm actually reading this book. It's a reread. I started it today and it just proved to me how much I love this book, and it just solidified it that much more in my heart. There are specific scenes in this book that just come up in my mind at random times. Also, I was listening to a song that was pretty popular around the time I was reading this, and I just kept listening to the song as I was reading this. The first time I read it fully on ebook and mostly during my commute. So every time I'm on my commute when I read, I have my headphones in and listen to music. And that song is not even a sad song. I think it's supposed to be a pretty upbeat song, but I think it's in Spanish. And every time I hear that song, I just get sad and just think about this book. That is how imprinted this book is in my mind. That song is associated with Wolfsong forever in my mind now. In fact, I should just listen to this song. I can't remember the song. I kept trying. I kept humming it to Siri and she couldn't tell me which song it was. But I should really find that song and listen to it as I do my reread, because that would just be perfect. But yeah, Wolfsong is one of my favorite books, and it definitely, I think about it a lot still, even after 2 years, because I read it in 2021. Forbidden by Tabitha Suzuma. This book. So even though I've read this book, I believe I read it in 2013. Let me actually check. No, I read it in 2014, so 9 years ago. There are vivid scenes in here that I still remember, and some of them I think about at least once a month, especially the ending, but also a couple other scenes. This book is so heartbreaking to me, and every time I think about it, I still have that pit in my stomach that I did the first time I read it. I never reread it, mainly because it is so sad, but I think this 2024 is going to be the year that I finally reread it. This is not really for the faint of heart, because it's very taboo. It's actually a young adult book, so it's not very graphic. It's actually about a brother and sister falling in love. And I know what you're thinking, because it's exactly what I was thinking before I read this one. Ick, which it kind of is, but I would say just go into it with an open mind. And first of all, I wouldn't condone this in real life, but in the context of this book and the things the characters went through, I was sympathetic and I did definitely understand, and it was so heartbreaking in the end. So like I said, brother and a sister, and they have 3 other siblings, and their mom is just like the most horrible mother ever to walk the earth. She's just a fucking horrible person and mother. Like, she should have never had kids, let alone 5. And they are the 2 oldest, and because their mother is such an absentee parent and their father is not in the picture at all, they basically have become the mom and dad to especially the youngest 2. So they are basically responsible for taking care of them, for bathing them, for making their lunch, for taking them to school. So they are basically the parental unit for the rest of the family. So the only one that knows what the other is going through is each other. That is what brings them closer. They're already very close, and they ultimately fall in love. Like I said, I wouldn't condone this in real life, but I 100% understood them in this book, and it was just so sad. And like I said, there are moments in here that I still think about to this day, even though I read it 9 years ago. By the way, I didn't even tell you what Wolfsong is about. I just assume that everybody knows what this book is about, considering I talk about it constantly. This is a werewolf story about Ox and Joe. Joe is the werewolf, Ox is human. They meet when Ox is 16 and Joe is 10, and Joe immediately can smell his mate when he meets Ox, and he tells him that he smells like candy canes and pine cones and epic and awesome. And what Ox and Joe do not realize is that Joe is smelling his mate, but obviously Joe's still 10, Ox is 16, nothing happens to them, happens at that point. They become friends. In fact, Ox starts dating a girl, and eventually when Joe is old enough, they do start a relationship. So it's a male-male love story. All of the books in this series are male-male romances. But then tragedy strikes the town and Joe leaves for years. And that is pretty much where the heartbreak comes in. I like I said, thinking about it now just almost makes me want to cry. So yeah, it's a good book. It's such a good book. I think TJ Klune writes werewolf dynamics so well, the found family aspect so well, and it is one of my favorite books of all time. A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas, and it's mainly Rhysand who is constantly on my mind. Rhysand is my favorite love interest. He's perfection in my opinion. I love him, and the scenes in this book just live in my mind rent free. I constantly think about these scenes, and I constantly think about him. Like he's just rooted himself into my heart and has never left. I absolutely adore him. So for those of you who don't know, Court of Mist and Fury is the second book in A Court of Thorns and Roses series. This book follows events from the first book, and it's a different love interest from the first book. And both Rhysand and Feyre are very traumatized from horrible things that happened in their past, and Rhysand really helps Feyre become the person that she's supposed to be, and he's just perfection in my opinion. And yeah, I constantly think about him. Like, I wouldn't say that there's a day goes by where I don't think about him, but I would say I think about him weekly. Like, he's just amazing. And yeah, this is obviously where we find out the most about him. This is where the love story really develops. So obviously, A Court of Mist and Fury had to be on here. Obsession by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is not a very popular book by her. It's actually kind of a spin-off from her Luck series, and I actually DNF'd that series. Obsession, I read years ago, and there are particular scenes in this book that I still really think about. It is one of my first actual romances with actual explicit sex scene, so maybe that is why I never stopped thinking about it. I never reread this, and I really want to, so I really should. I think I'll buy the physical copy and reread it this year or next year, and I'm really interested to see if it stands the test of time, because obviously since then I have read a bunch of romances and a bunch of paranormal / alien romances. This follows a girl who's, I think she's in danger from aliens, and then she gets another alien protects her, and they fall in love. Honestly, I don't think it is that revolutionary. I don't think it is that good, but I don't know, maybe it is because it's one of the first ones I've read that I keep thinking about it. And I do remember after I first read it, like there were a couple of scenes that I kept rereading, yet I never reread this book. I do know that it's a book that I've been thinking about throughout the years. But I guess time will tell, and my reread will tell if it's actually a favorite book or not. The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare, and I'm mainly talking about Clockwork Prince and Clockwork Princess. There are two scenes, and both of them are at the end of both books, that I cannot stop thinking about. Like, you'll sense a theme in these books. Mainly heartbreaking scenes are the ones that stick by me. There's a big scene in Clockwork Prince that is so heartbreaking, it just tore out my heart and stomped on it. And that scene really solidified this series as one of my favorites. And then there is this big epilogue in Clockwork Princess that I don't really want to spoil, but it really, one of the things I love about books where there's a character that is immortal, I love when it shows the loneliness of that. I love that in books with immortal characters. I think Addie LaRue did that perfectly, and I think Clockwork Princess did that wonderfully. It is so heartbreaking, and people don't think about that. I know a lot of people think, yeah, I wish I was immortal, but I really don't want to be immortal. Unless everybody that I know and love is also immortal, then obviously that would be different. But there's nothing lonelier to me than watching the people I love age and die and me stay the same, and then live in a world that is completely different from the one that I grew up in. Like that, and like I said, this epilogue conveys that feeling perfectly. So yeah, mainly those books or those scenes really stand out in my mind, and I constantly keep thinking about it. Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. Once again, one of my favorite series of all time, and it's definitely my favorite duology of all time. Once again, there are scenes here that I cannot stop thinking about, especially in Crooked Kingdom. The way Leigh wrote these characters is wonderful to me. I live in Amsterdam, and this book was inspired by Amsterdam, like this Ketterdam was inspired by Amsterdam in like, I don't know when, in the past. Walking through Amsterdam does obviously remind me of reading Crooked Kingdom especially. I feel like these characters, they don't feel like characters to me. They feel like real people. So yeah, there are scenes in here that I constantly think about, and especially the ending of Crooked Kingdom. Just thinking about it makes me want to cry, so I try not to think about it too much. But yeah, definitely a series that there's not a month that goes by that I don't think about these characters. The Duchess Deal by Tessa Dare. This is one of my favorite historical romances. It's actually my first historical romance that I ever read, which obviously makes it special in my book. I just keep talking about this book without telling you what they are about. I'm also sick. I'm sorry if you can hear my voice. I don't know. I cannot really talk a whole lot. So The Duchess Deal is about this duke who came back from war, and now he is very scarred, and his fiance left him, but they already ordered her wedding dress to be made. So the seamstress has not been paid yet. So one day she decides to wear that wedding dress and go demand payment from the Duke. And instead of paying her, he proposes marriage because he needs an heir and he thinks that nobody will ever love him. So she agrees, and he just wants it to be a marriage in name only. He only wants to have sex with her until she gets pregnant, and then he wants to ship her off to wherever to take care of his son and heir. But she has other plans. She's slowly starting to fall for him, and she wants to have a real marriage with him. And this is a very sad book, but also very funny. It's like especially the household in this book gets up to shenanigans that I really love. It's a Beauty and the Beast retelling that I really love. And there are scenes in here, like I said, I keep repeating myself, but I find myself thinking about this book very often. And once again, a book that I really want to do a reread for. So hopefully in 2024, I can read some of them and live my happiest life. Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is a book told in verse. It's a young adult, and you follow Camino and Yahaira, and they share the same father even though they don't know it. So basically they're sisters. One of them lives in New York, the other lives in the Dominican Republic, and basically their dad lives in New York for most of the year, and then in the summer he goes to the Dominican Republic to visit his other daughter. And one day when he does that, his plane actually crashes and he dies, and that is when they find out about each other. So Camino actually goes to the Dominican Republic, and that's where they get to know each other. This book, I love books about sisters. I don't have a sister, which is why I love these kinds of books. Yeah, just the sister dynamics, this whole story, these characters. I don't think about them as often as all the other ones I've mentioned, but I do find myself thinking about this book throughout the years. And even though it's told in verse, which means less time with the characters, they did definitely make an impact on me. Yeah, I find myself thinking about them at random times. The Viscount Who Loved Me by Julia Quinn. This is my favorite Bridgerton book, and it's definitely one of my favorite historical romances of all time. You follow Kate and Anthony's the oldest Bridgerton child, and he needs to get married because, you know, he needs to start producing heirs. But his father died when he was younger, and he saw what that did to his mother, and he vowed to never fall in love. So he sets his eye on the most beautiful girl in the ton, but her sister overhears him saying that he's not gonna love the woman he's gonna marry. So she wants more for her sister, so she's set out to make sure that they're not gonna get married. So it's a forced proximity. Eventually they obviously have more chemistry, and eventually they get married. This book was so good, and yes, I do find myself thinking about these characters. I think about her dog a lot. I think about their banter. I think about the Pall Mall game a lot. I think about the bee stinging scene a lot. Yeah, I love this book. I love it so much. And this is definitely one of the reasons why I ultimately love the Bridgerton books. It's why it's one of my favorite series. It's mostly because of this book. Because I feel like if I didn't love this book as much, I wouldn't have loved the series as much as I did, because I think I only gave 2 of them 5 stars, and this being one of them. But yeah, especially comparing it to all the other ones in the Bridgertons, this is definitely the one I think about the most often. The Immortals After Dark series by Kresley Cole. I'm technically cheating because I finished the Immortals After Dark books this year, but since this is such a long series, I decided to include it anyway. And I'm showing you these 2 because these 2 are really when I fell in love with the series, because the first 2, I did like them, but I didn't love it. Whereas with these 2, once I started these 2, it was over for me. I just binged them to no end. Immortals After Dark is a series of fated mates, and each book you follow 2 different characters who fall in love and who find their mates, basically. And most of them are pretty much enemies in the beginning. And I find myself thinking about this world a lot. I find myself thinking about some of the love stories a lot. Lately, I've been thinking about Dark Sky a lot. But yeah, it's like, it depends on the month which book I'm thinking about more. But yeah, I really love this series. I gave most of them 5 stars. And yeah, I frequently think about this series, and now especially during spooky season, they are not far from my mind. I don't think I have time to reread one of them, but if I did, I definitely would. Again, The Magic by Lisa Kleypas. This is the 0.5 book in her Wallflower series, and in this book you follow the sisters of Westcliff, who I love. I love his book. But this book, I don't know, as much as, even though It Happened One Autumn is one of my favorite historical romances of all time, this one is too. I feel like this one, there are specific scenes, especially the one where the hero finally finds out about her secret, that I constantly think about. Basically, this is about Lady Aline and McKenna's a stable boy, but they fall in love. And when her dad finds out, he threatens him unless she breaks up with him. So she does, to protect him. And he goes away and goes to the United States, where he amasses a fortune. And she, in the meanwhile, has like a horrible accident that scars a lot of her body. And now, years later, he's back for revenge on the woman that broke his heart. But of course, he's gonna fall in love again. Or like, he never stopped loving her. This, like I said, there's a scene towards the end of the book where she tells him her secret about her scars. And he has such righteous anger towards her and towards that whole situation that I just love. I love that scene so much. It is so good. That is one of the scenes that I constantly think about whenever I think about historical romances, or if I think about this book. The Ex Hex by Aaron Sterling. So this is about another guy named Reese. I'm actually going to talk about another Reese. Apparently, there's only one name that I constantly be thinking about, and it's Reese. If a character is named Reese, he's probably gonna end up on my mind for the rest of my life. I love this book. I know some people really didn't, but I really did. This is second chance romance between Vivi and Reese, and like 9 years ago they had this whirlwind romance, and he broke her heart. And so she put a curse on him, but the curse never worked until he returns to the place where she lives, and suddenly everything that can go wrong is going wrong. So she realizes that the curse worked after all these years, and now she has to help him lift the curse, and then they fall in love again. I very often think about this town and think about the characters, think about Reese and Vivi, and every time it's this time of year, I really want to reread it. I just really love this book. This is a mix between Gilmore Girls and Charmed, which are two of my favorite TV shows of all time. So I was bound to love this book, and I really did. And yeah, like I said, there are, especially around spooky season, is when I think about this book a lot. Twisted Games by Anna Huang, another Reese, like I said. There are some scenes in here that I cannot stop thinking about. The crawl to me scene, the throne scene, especially like I said, the spicy scenes are what I think about a lot when it comes to this book. But also just the fact that this is like a princess falling in love with her bodyguard, which is one of my favorite tropes. I love bodyguard romances. And I think this one did it so well. And, you know, the Twisted series is a very popular series, so it gets brought up a lot, and every time it does, I think about Twisted Games and how much I loved it. This feels like a Princess Diaries retelling, Princess Diaries 2 retelling, and that is one of my favorite movies too. So yeah, I spend a lot of my time thinking about this book. How the Dukes Stole Christmas, but especially, so this is a book with 4 different short stories, but the one I'm mainly talking about is The Duke of Christmas Present, which is Sarah MacLean's book. Ugh, this book just breaks my heart. This is a second chance romance, and apparently I love second chance romances. I remember loving this book so much, and I read it last Christmas, and throughout the year, I constantly kept thinking about it. Just the heartbreak of it all, just the longing, the loneliness of this book. I felt like Sarah MacLean did such a good job portraying that, and like the vibes of it all, I keep thinking about. I just keep picturing him alone, and then her coming back and telling him all these stories. I just love it so much. And I read it and I thought it was going to be a fun time. I love historical romance, and I love reading historical romance during the fall-winter months, so let's try this out. And I didn't expect to fall in love with these stories, but especially this one so much. And last but most certainly not least is Sea of Ruin by Pam Godwin. I read this one at the end of 2022 as well, and throughout this year I kept constantly thinking about it. I just fell in love with this story. I fell in love with Ashley Cutler and with Bennett. It was so good. It was so good. And there are, once again, scenes in here that I keep thinking about. I've never reread this book, obviously, because since I only read it last year. But I haven't even reread scenes in this book, which sometimes I do, but I didn't for this book. Yet I still remember some scenes vividly. I find myself thinking about this book quite often. Yeah, I keep thinking, I want to reread this book. I want to reread this book. In fact, actually, there was a special edition of this book that was shipping from the US, and it was so beautiful that I decided to splurge and buy it, even though I rarely do that, because buying books from the US is fucking expensive. But I did for this book because I loved it so much. I find myself constantly thinking about the scenes in here and Bennett and Ashley falling in love, and it's just so good. It is so, so good. So yeah, those were all the books that I cannot stop thinking about. Definitely let me know in the comments below if some of these are books that you cannot stop thinking about, or I would really love to know some of the books that you cannot stop thinking about. And if you don't want to leave any of those, definitely leave me a... What should you leave me? Leave me a pirate emoji down below, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.